Welcome to My Body, My Bump, My Baby, where we help women be empowered, intentional mothers. This podcast is best enjoyed sipping tea or taking a stroll in nature. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be substituted for professional psychological or medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, midwife, or other qualified health provider with any questions about your personal situation, health, or medical condition.
Welcome back to My Body, My Bump, My Baby. Today we have a special episode where we will be discussing the various types of birth. And we don't mean various types of animals' birth or anything like that, but more so of the various locations and choices for your birth as it relates to hospital births, birth center births, and home births. So we'll be going through what is each of those, what to expect in each of the settings, what birth looks like and how it unfolds in each of the settings, and how to choose the right location for you. B, would you like to go ahead and get us started with your doula experience?
So, I think a good place to start would be just a hospital birth, because I think that is the most common. I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm assuming that the majority of women in the United States will first look into a hospital birth. So let me say a couple of things at the very beginning. We're going to be using the word birth center. And a lot of hospitals will call the labor and delivery ward of the hospital a birth center. And I want to talk about that for just a minute before we do a deep dive into each location. So
it's the birth center at their hospital. They call it the center of birth there. It's their wing.
It's literally labor and delivery.
Word.
And what happened was, if you have not listened to our history of birth and pain management, go check that out. There's a little bit of history here. So there was a time where birth happened the majority of the time outside of the hospital, and there was a big push to bring birth into the hospital because they crunched some numbers and they found that
birth makes money.
Birth makes a lot of money. For most hospitals, the labor and delivery ward is the money maker. It makes a lot of money. And
it's also guaranteed.
And it's right as far as we are gonna make money. We are gonna have people coming in.
There's always someone pregnant.
Except back in the day when the majority of women would birth at home, which, by the way, wasn't that long ago. It was about 70 years ago when this big change maybe a little bit longer than 70 years, but when this big change started to happen, they were noticing that they couldn't get women to come to the hospital because the hospital is generally for sick people, and pregnant women could just not understand why they would want to go to a hospital to give birth. So then they coined the term birth center, and there was a very big campaign to actually recreate those rooms. The rooms used to be regular hospital rooms, and ladies didn't like them, and they started to look around and say, hey, what do we need to do to get these ladies to come? And so they tried to change the environment and make them a little bit more cozy and welcoming. So you may be birthing at a birth center, but please delineate as we're talking. Are you birthing at a hospital birth center, or are you birthing at a freestanding birth center? So we're going to kind of get into those differences right here. So hospitals are typically attended by obstetricians. There are occasional hospital teams or OB teams that may have some midwives on the team. We used to have an amazing team here in Colorado Springs that was part of a practice, and it was so nice to have these certified nurse midwives attending in a hospital, because it was a really great way for women who wanted a less intervened, more unmedicated, intuitive birth experience, but wanted to have the safety net of the hospital. Unfortunately, and I don't know if this is 100% true. This is my guess about what happened, but I think they weren't bringing in enough money, because there's not enough interventions when a midwife is involved, right? Mm-hmm. And so they kind of got moved out, and those ladies eventually opened our freestanding birth center. Now, freestanding birth center does not have obstetricians at all. And it's in a separate location than the hospital. It's in its own special little location.
Aren't they technically, though, supported, or I don't know what the right word is for it, but they have an obstetrician who is the main support of the birth center. They're never there. They're kind of the funder, or underneath his license.
I think that might be the case. Okay. And hopefully one day we'll get one of the ladies from the birth center over here to kind of talk to us about how that works. But that is my understanding, and I don't know for sure if that's exactly how it works. But what I will say is there is not an obstetrician attending in that space at any time.
Ever. Yep.
No.
Nope.
And so that is one of the major differences. If we go back to a hospital, I think most women realize that you can be given a lot of different medications there. You can have surgery there. That's a cesarean birth. And they have a lot of really great medical equipment that they can use to support a birth. A freestanding birth center is going to have a lot less of that kind of thing. They're not going to have a ton of medication. So, for example, you would not get an epidural at a freestanding birth center, but you might get nitrous oxide. Mm-hmm. You might not get nitrous oxide at a hospital. It's kind of interesting.
Cheap gas.
About 5 years ago, they brought nitrous oxide back, and it was great. And then COVID came, and they basically took nitrous oxide away. And as far as I've heard so far, most hospitals still won't use it. So that's kind of like it was here, and boop, boop, is out. It's just gone. But it was a popular thing in the birth centers for sure, because it is one of the pain coping options that they can provide.
And then at the birth center, the attendants are certified nurse midwives.
Certified nurse midwives, and I do believe that's going to be true across the country. So yes. Remember, as we're talking, some of the licensure rules are going to be different by state. So there are occasions I may say something and I'm referencing the state of Colorado. I don't know the rules of all of the states in the United States, but I do believe that most birth centers do need to have a certified nurse midwife. And so here's the difference between a certified nurse midwife and then a certified professional midwife. They have, a different level of education. They have a different level of experience. But the certified nurse midwife can work in a hospital. A certified professional midwife cannot. They just have a different licensure, different credential. So like I mentioned, the ladies who opened our birth center in Colorado Springs actually did practice in one of the hospitals. It's actually the hospital that's like 5 minutes up the road from our birth center prior to opening our freestanding birth center. So you could have a hospital birth. Most common, most popular, most accepted. You can have a birth center birth. This is the one where you're probably going for an unmedicated birth experience. You probably don't want a lot of interventions. And maybe you just want to have a little bit more say on how things unfold. And then there's a third option, and the third option is home birth.
You have a lot of say on how it unfolds.
You have a lot of say. One of the things I really love about home birth is it is the one option where you have a lot more control. And I'm not talking about control on how your labor unfolds or control on the medical care that's provided, but I'm talking about the control that maybe people don't consider being very valuable, but it turns out it really is. So, for example, in a hospital and a birth center, people will be coming in and out of your room that you don't know. So potentially, nurses that you haven't met before, medical providers that you haven't met before, they, do a little tap on the door, and then they just walk in, right? And it doesn't really matter what state you're in. They're coming in. And there are things sometimes happening to you that maybe have not been discussed very thoroughly, that you weren't expecting, and it just kind of feels a little bit wild. That will not happen in a home birth. The home birth is only the people that you have invited. Usually you have met all of the attendees prior. There's some rare cases, midwives are human.
Call,
Somebody got sick, another midwife has to come. But most of the time, the midwives are really, really good about making sure that you know everyone. So
same with at a birth center too. I mean, in this setting in Colorado, the number of midwives,
they try to make sure you meet everybody.
Yes, I know other birth centers and friends that have used other birth centers where there's 20 plus midwives, and
you can't ever meet them all.
But in the home birth setting, you have that locus of control of inviting someone into your space, consciously inviting someone into your space and knowing they're going to be in your space.
Right. And I don't want to jump ahead, but I will just kind of put out just this little bit of a teaser. There is a way that birth will show up for each one of these locations, and it's slightly different.
Or very different.
Yes. But it's different. So, birth has many faces, and your location, the location that you choose, will really decide how birth will show up for you in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. And did you mention what the CPM? So at a home birth, there are two different types of attendants that could possibly attend your home birth. One is a certified nurse midwife, which we talked about with the birth center. So these are nurses, first and foremost in their training, and then they do additional training, both professional and medical, to become midwives.
Right. So they actually do it's a lot of education.
Yeah.
So
a little, it's a lot.
Right. So they have to, it's not just a nurse. So most registered nurse right, has only an associate's. A certified nurse midwife has a bachelor's in nursing and then a master's in midwifery. Mm-hmm. And then they have apprenticeship, which they do in the hospital. Mm-hmm. A CPM, it is not, it's a
Which is a certified professional midwife.
Yes, certified professional midwife. It's not college-based. It is a very traditional method of training. So it's an apprenticeship.
It's 100% experience-based. Not 100%. I'm just saying it is experience.
It's primarily
yes, and so they have years and years of experience before they can sit for their boards.
Right. So they do have curriculum. Mm-hmm. They are actually practicing as an apprentice with an experienced midwife as they're moving through their curriculum, and they have to have a lot more in-person experience to qualify to sit for licensure than a CNM. So this is very interesting, the way that they learn. A CNM is going to be a lot of book knowledge and a lot less hands-on experience to start, and a CPM is going to be less book knowledge and a lot of hands-on experience to start. So, if you put a brand new licensed CPM next to a brand new licensed CNM, one who has not worked in labor and delivery, literally just did the experience and then the apprenticeship, the CPM will have a lot more hands-on skill and confidence at that point, and it'll change over time, but just based on the way that they were learning, they're kind of like in the trenches as they learn.
Mm-hmm. And either of these can be attendance at your home birth, at least in Colorado.
In Colorado.
Mm-hmm. And then oftentimes one thing that people mistaken for home birth, and what we're talking about with home birth here with a licensed midwife, is unassisted birth. So we're discussing a home birth where you have an attendant, like a CPM or a CNM at your birth.
Right. So a medically trained and licensed support person midwife. Yeah. And then there is something called free birth or unassisted birth. And this is when a person might choose to birth at home without any medically licensed professional there to support them.
Yeah. And we're not going to discuss that in this episode, but we do want to make sure that it's mentioned. So, because oftentimes there is a confusion between, you're having a home birth, and the thoughts are that it's unassisted versus having support there.
Oh, yeah. I can see that. So
because it's not the norm anymore.
Right. So people don't understand what it is. And I think maybe for some people, the first thing that comes to mind is it's like the Amish. But did you know that the Amish are actually attended by midwives?
Midwives,
yes,
yeah.
they do not actually do free birth or unassisted
not purposely.
birth. Not if they don't have to.
Yep. Eventually, when you get up to a higher amount of children, you might take quicker, or it might be quicker.
Right.
The midwife is always trying to get
right.
there.
But oftentimes, one of the things I will say about unassisted or free birth is there are occasions where those people are also maybe not receiving good quality medical care during the pregnancy as well. And so that kind of birth is going to show up differently too. So all of the
some people make that as a choice, and that's someone's choice to make, but we just want to make sure we clarify the difference between the two.
Right. So those are the differences. Those are the 4 types of locations or styles that you can choose. Let's get into what you can expect in each setting, because earlier I said that birth is going to show up slightly differently. And you might want to, why would that be? Mm-hmm. Why would that be?
Yeah. And I can speak to my experience with the birth of my son in a birth center, but I want B to speak mainly to the hospital birth and home birth as well.
Well, let's start with the hospital birth then.
Yep.
What can you expect if you are being cared for by an OB or even a midwife who delivers in a hospital? Either one of those. So those teams typically are required to take a higher load of patients. And so the amount of time for appointments is typically very short.
It's like your standard 15 to 20 minute appointment.
Right. Exactly.
There's still time that the OBs need for notes.
And I think, this is okay for some people, and then some people find that they're missing some things that they need. For example, they're missing the space and time to ask all of the questions that they have. It's just not really there. I mean, they're really coming in to check in hey, you still doing good? Are you alive? Nothing's falling apart. Baby's
Your pee
alive.
looks good.
Right. Yeah. Baby's still alive and kicking and looking good. Good. They're really, that's the level that they're trying to manage. They want to make sure that you're not going downhill. And baby's not going downhill.
And this is, of course, with you have an obstetrician. If for some reason you needed to see a maternal fetal MFM, medicine, or like a specialist, they're going to be spending, it's going to be a little bit of a different experience, but we're talking about a standard
Just
hospital
an
birth.
obstetrician.
Yep.
Yeah, so they don't have time really for education. They don't have a lot of time for building relationships. So it's not going to be a relationship where they really got to know you and you got to know them. It's going to be a very surface deep type of relationship that you're going to create with that person.
And when is your first appointment typically? 12 weeks or 10 weeks?
Some people can get in really early, as early as 8 weeks, but
When you can see the heartbeat.
Well, I mean, they can get in and get their blood test
Okay.
and get some dating maybe.
Yeah.
But what we're finding in Colorado Springs is there's a lot of baby having, and there's not enough providers. And so a lot of people here in Colorado Springs are very recently, so we are September 2022, and a lot of people are not able to get in until like 12 weeks, which causes some people some frustration.
Especially That's a
for
long
first-time
moms.
Yeah, it's a
I
long
can
time to wait.
imagine that's really hard. Location of appointments?
Yeah, so if you are having a hospital birth and you're being attended by a OB or a midwife, then it's usually it's at that OB's office. And like I said, it's kind of going to be very quick and brief and very much to the details. Like, let's do some tests. These are the tests that you need to do this week. How are you feeling? Good. Okay, bye.
Let's talk about that. These are the tests you need to do this week. Mm-hmm. So it's more telling than it is options.
Yes.
Okay. I want to talk about that when we get to the birth center and home birth too.
Okay. Do you want to chat about birth center?
Yeah, so the birth center. So, I mean, B just brought that up, like a great point. So what's happening at each appointment? So in the birth center, we mentioned that a hospital birth is usually like a 15-minute standard appointment. You might have longer ones if there's an ultrasound or something involved as well. But at the birth center, your appointments are all, unless it's changed, it was all scheduled for 30 minutes minimum. I think the first one was about an hour.
Nice.
And there were a couple others that were longer throughout as well. But not only are they focusing in on, checking in on baby, but they're very geared towards checking in on mama as well. So they see, like, midwives are there to support the woman. They see that as an important part of their role. So I would get questions about my diet, my emotions, my feelings that I had going on. We would get questions about, like, physically how I'm doing, what am I doing for movement every single time. We would talk about my sleep. So a very more like coach-centric type of setting.
And holistic. Like
yes.
checking in with the whole self, not just the physical body.
Correct. I still wouldn't call it as in-depth as what I'm getting in the home birth setting now.
Right.
But in the birth center setting, I felt very supported throughout the entire process. I also felt very supported in all of the decisions that I was making, and I felt like every decision was mine to make.
Nice.
I never felt that it was something that I had to do, with the exception of a couple of tests that were required for them to have a freestanding birth center, such as the gestational diabetes scan.
I love that you highlighted that because, there are going to be some things across the board. It doesn't matter if it's hospital birth center or home birth. If you were working with a licensed medical professional, the state has certain requirements.
Yes.
Like the state requires that they provide that they ask you to take this test or they ask you to do these things.
But they
you
gave
can
me options
always say
too.
no.
Yes, and they gave me options for different things too.
Right.
And they would essentially use brain. So benefits, risks, alternatives, intuition. Mm-hmm. Well, not that part for them, but they were very great on providing me with all of the resources. Like I remember I had something in my urine in the very beginning, and I was adamant, like I'm not taking an antibiotic. Like that was a last course thing for me. And they gave me evidence-based research on other methods to support. And I used those, and it cleared up. And
Nice.
It was great. And they asked, do you want to test again? I said, sure, why not? We'll test it.
Yeah.
So they were very great about that. And then also with the choices about birth and postpartum interventions and even interventions for the baby, they always gave me, okay, do you want vitamin K for your baby or Hep B for your baby, they would always give the informed information on these are the pros. These are the things that could go wrong. This is what choice would you like to make?
I like that there. So, one of the things you're highlighting is that because of these longer appointments, they have a little bit more space to inform and educate. Inform is, hey, this is coming up. You should get educated. Yes, so that you can make an informed decision.
Before I needed to make those.
We
had all the decisions made by 36 weeks for anything that involved baby.
And you knew what to be looking for.
Yep.
Like you knew what to go home and do homework on. And, I think that is very rare. In a hospital setting, they don't have time for education. They don't have time to outline the roadmap of what's coming next so that you can get prepared to make a decision. You're pretty much left to your own devices and resources to figure that out on your own, which can actually be quite challenging.
It's overwhelming.
Also, you may not know to do that. And if you don't know to do that,
you have a choice.
Right, you're just waiting to be told. That model oftentimes is a lot of, here's what you do next. And this is what you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. And there isn't any providing education about the whys, or does this make sense, or the alternatives, or any of those things. You have to take the initiative to do that on your own. So you have to be cognizant of that.
And I would still say in a birth center setting, you still have to take some initiative. But they'll make recommendations. It's just whether you choose to research and follow them too. But for me, I was worried about induction. That was just something that was on my head from day one. And so I was asking about it from day one. And so they went through everything with me, like, acupuncture, all the different options. But they went through that with me a long time, like way in advance.
Nice.
And they also reassured me that most people don't go past 42 weeks. And they figure out a way to not get them there.
We did do a little bit of a podcast on induction. And if you missed it, go back because it's been released before we released this episode. But
you will not have an induction at the birth center. They won't do an induction.
The probability of having an induction at a birth center, a freestanding birth center, is very low. It's important for most women to realize that a first-time mom, so this is like the first baby you're going to have, will actually go 10 days over her due date. A lot of ladies don't know that. It's also important to know that most hospitals, and it depends on what state you're in, some states are really induction heavy. So some states would like women to have babies at 38 weeks. Some states would like babies to come at 39 weeks. I just told you that most babies are going to come at 41 weeks and 3 days if you leave them be. If that's the case, most women are going to be kind of facing this potential induction situation. So, if you're a person who is like, I really don't want to have an induction, then maybe looking at where you're birthing might start to come into play a little bit more heavily, because if that's something that's heavy on your mind, then you probably want to choose something other than hospital, because the probability of an induction goes up.
And then you don't have to be on your defense about not having one.
Right.
And when we said the probability of an induction at a birth center, what I want to clarify with that is that a birth center will never host an induction. I'm saying host, but you cannot be induced like how we induce at a hospital at a birth center.
Oh, right.
Medications and the cascade of interventions that are likely needed are not something that takes place at a birth center.
No.
So I just want to clarify that. And then location of appointments. All of the appointments take place at the birth center.
Well, let me go back and clarify one more thing, though.
Okay.
Induction does happen for women giving birth at birth centers. It's just not medical induction.
Yes. So you can make a choice on one of the other induction methods, but again, your choice.
Right.
Absolutely your choice.
Right.
And then I mentioned locations, always at that birth center, except for during COVID when they were in the comfort of my own home. And then timing of appointments, it's pretty standard, pretty typical, similar to an OB's office. or an OB's practice, but usually 8 weeks, then 12 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks. I don't know if we're having the same issue with the appointments here right now, but maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know.
And then the standard setting. The thing that's a little bit different about the birth center, hospitals, or when you're delivering in an OB practice, you're oftentimes offered ultrasounds like candy. Birth center, you have an ultrasound in the beginning, and then your next ultrasound is usually at that 20-week ultrasound, unless you request one in between or there's a reason why to have one in between. And then you do a positioning check towards the end of pregnancy, around 36 weeks, I think. That was what mine was. And then after that, unless it's medically warranted or you ask for it, it's typically not in the standard of care.
I want to clarify for ultrasounds, a hospital or an OB care, ultrasound typically is going to be, it's actually dictated by insurance. So it's typically going to be one at the very beginning and then the anatomy scan somewhere around 19 to 21 weeks. And rarely will there be one after that unless the OB thinks there's a reason to take a look at things. And in that case, they have to have a valid reason because the insurance won't cover it, la-di-da-di-da.
Just
so
that's friends that have had just regular pregnancies that get one almost every appointment.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. It definitely is based on insurance and what they'll cover, so I'm not sure how they're managing to do that. Like I said, if an OB says, hey, we need to take a look at something, then they can do it.
And there's also different types of ultrasounds, too. Like the positioning check is just a really quick one.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't anything that was in-depth at all. Like an anatomy scan, from the birth center in a home birth, you typically are sent off somewhere else to do the anatomy scan.
Mm-hmm.
To like an imaging center.
Right.
Okay.
So a home birth is, now we're talking about being attended by either a CPM or a CNM, depending on the regulation in your state. The amount of time spent with a midwife is...
I guess I can speak to this a little bit more, and you can speak more to what birth looks like in that setting.
It varies based on the midwife and her practice, but home birth midwives... So I'm going to say hospitals will take the highest patient load. Birth centers, they will take less than a hospital, but they will take more than a home birth. So the home birth midwife is typically a very small practice. She usually is not taking a ton of births a month because she has to get to all of them. And because of that allows her to spend a lot more time answering questions, providing education, creating a relationship. Mm-hmm. A home birth appointment could last anywhere between 45 minutes to 2 hours. Mm-hmm. They're very in-depth.
That's my experience. Our midwife, she blocks slots for at least 90 minutes for every single appointment. Mm-hmm. Except for when she starts visiting in the home, then they're longer. The location of appointments, this is where it's a little bit misleading, but it used to be that appointments were in your home, and at least in Colorado Springs now, they're typically at the home birth midwife's either office or at her home in her office setting. For most of the appointments up until 34 or 36 weeks when she starts to come to you and to be in the comfort of your own home.
And this is going to also differ from midwife to midwife, but most will do their meet and greet in your home, and then you will start going to their office for all of your appointments. At about 36, 37 weeks, they will start another in-home visit. For some midwives, it's just one. This is just the in-home visit where she's going to go through your supplies. She usually provides you a supply list and going through supplies, and you're doing a little bit of prenatal care and really just kind of taking a look at the location and making sure that everything is set up and prepared correctly. But after that, you would actually, for a lot of midwives, go back to her office.
Mm-hmm. And so what's happening we can talk a little bit about what happens at those appointments too. It's pretty standard of care. I mean, they're checking in on you as a person, as a human. So similar to the birth center, checking in on baby, so they're always feeling fundal height. If you choose to have a Doppler or fetoscope, they're able to listen to the heartbeat that way. And then some home birth midwives do have access to ultrasound. I couldn't think of the word. Looking at you. Mm-hmm. Ultrasound, or they'll send you out for an ultrasound if that's something that is interested you or medically warranted to need. And if it is in their home too, they have a setup similar. I don't want to say similar to a doctor's office, but it is a comfortable setup for mama to lay there to feel everything going on, feel positioning of baby if you're in that stage of pregnancy.
It's a lot more warm though. Yes. I think the image would be, there is, likely a desk and there's a laptop and
there's tons of toys for other kids.
Right. There's a exam bed, but usually it's a much warmer, cozy bed than you would expect in the doctor's office. And they decorate it more like
homey.
Yeah, like a home bedroom that's comfortable and inviting.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned them talking about also like nutrition, and you talk about nutrition, you talk about sleep, you talk about supplementation. When I left our home birth midwife, so the one that we have chose to attend our birth, she is an author as well, so she has a few books, and she'll always send her clients with something that it's called Nourish and Thrive, which is a book that's about half an inch thick that has everything from, it's amazing. And she's always updating it. So she sends you with that and then any additional material. So she sent me with every single thing, every single informed consent item that I could ever have, including laboratory testing that were options, including the price of every single one. There were things in there about a diet and supplementation as well, and just everything. For some, it could be overwhelming. For me, I felt very at home because of what I know and what I do too. But, it was amazing to see even options for different, like, cord cutting. So burning of the cord versus cord cutting. I was like, that's amazing. So cool to see.
Yes.
But these are all things that you talk about. And your spouse, if they're able to come with you or your partner is able to come with you, they make it a point to really get to know you and your family and your kids as well. The last time we walked in, I just remember her, she was like, "Where's Oliver?"
Aww.
We got a babysitter.
Aww.
But it was the expectation that he would be there.
Right.
Because they really want to get to know you as a family unit as well.
Yes. And I think the idea is that everybody should be comfortable with the midwife. Like, as you go through this, you create this relationship so that you are feeling really confident and comfortable with her, and your partner feels confident and comfortable. And like you said, your kiddos also. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So what does birth look like in each of these settings? This is where you're going to shine.
This is really interesting. Now, I think that there is an idea that birth looks or unfolds in one particular way.
What's that way? Movies. Water breaks. You scream. You rush to the hospital.
It's an emergency. Like, the baby's going to come out at any minute. It's like chaotic and crazy. Yes.
Everyone's running in and out.
Right. Nobody can get anywhere fast enough before the baby comes. It's not, it actually isn't like that. The other model that people might have gotten familiar with is, as soon as you get pregnant, you start reading books about, oh my gosh, how do I get this baby out? And the books will give you, all of this medical information about dilation and contractions and stages of labor.
They never mention effacement, though.
No, they don't. They don't. Just dilation.
Yeah.
It's the most important part, right? So you get all of this information, and that information, it's valid and it's correct for birth that unfolds in a hospital. But I will say that a lot of that information is incorrect for birth that unfolds in a home birth.
And lacking. It just lacks a lot, too.
Of what to expect.
Yeah.
Yes. So
what you could expect, and what you could have, and the opportunity to have this amazing, beautiful experience that is not an emergency.
I think it would be very. I'm going to do my best, but I think it's really difficult to truly describe the way these things look. But I will say that hospital birth is typically slower to unfold. So, as a doula, I would often say that birth is shy, and you really want it to get comfortable before you do anything. So that way it's kind of like on a roll. It's kind of moving, doing its own thing, and it doesn't like get spooked and go hide.
It's because we're mammals.
Yes.
I mean, when mammals feel threatened in a birth situation, their labor stops and they go somewhere else.
Right. And we biologically were created that way because that is a survival mechanism. They didn't, could you imagine? Just think about this for a second, okay? How would cats, for example, continue to create offspring if they were incredibly vulnerable to prey every time they gave birth? That would be troublesome, right? Every time this female cat is trying to give birth, it gets eaten. Well, then it wouldn't continue to propagate, right? Mm-hmm. It would be a problem. And so all mammals have this ability in their body, and it's very primal. It's to slow things down or to speed things up based on how safe a woman feels. And it's not just safe like, oh, yes, I feel like if anything goes wrong, my OB is not going to let me die. That's not what I'm talking about.
That's a different safety. That's very high level.
Right. That's very analytical too, by the way. What I'm talking about are the little things, actually the little things that we don't think about. So how about feeling safe in your environment? How about feeling safe with the people surrounding you? How about feeling safe in the fact that you feel confident that you can get through this thing on your own?
We oftentimes use the word at home for safe. Mm-hmm. So the phrases that you just said, if you feel at home with the people around you, mm-hmm. you feel at home in your environment. Mm-hmm. So we're replacing safety. That is safety.
That is safety. Mm-hmm. So now what we're doing when we go to the hospital is we're moving out of the home, out of safety, and into an environment that's very foreign. Unless you're a medical professional and this has become a very comfortable place for you, for most of us, the smells of the hospital are like, whoa, what is this? The lights, all of the talk, it's a lot for the people that don't live in that in a daily basis. And so the reason hospital birth will unfold very slow is because we took it out of the home. And because there are strangers coming into our space when we're super vulnerable. The first thing you do when you go into triage besides, the first thing you do when you go into triage is take your clothes off and put on this gown. So you go into this foreign, where in the world do we ever do this? You're not sick, you're not dying, right? You go into this foreign location and they're like, please get naked.
And let me stick my fingers
and then I'm gonna stick my fingers in you. It's a very awkward, odd thing. Now I understand that's the protocol and the procedure, but your subconscious, animalistic, primal body and mind doesn't give a fuck. It doesn't care that that's the protocol.
Yeah, it doesn't care that it's the protocol.
It doesn't care that it's the protocol.
But it cares that it's happening.
It does care that it's happening. And it cares that it's happening so much that it's always making this call between, am I safe or am I not? Even if it's not at the forefront of your mind, even if your analytical brain is not sitting there thinking, ooh, this is not safe. Mm-hmm. Subconscious, animalistic mama you is no. This does not feel right. And that's typically what will slow birth down or give you a very dysfunctional birth. Another thing that slows birth down with the hospital is the move. Knowing that at some point you're going to have to move from your home to this new location. There's a lot of people who stress and worry about, when do I do that? When is the right time? And because of that, you cannot drop down into labor land. And a woman really needs to be able to drop down into labor land so that she can really cope and manage. And when she does that, her body knows, oh,
I'm safe.
We're safe. we can do this.
And then at the hospital, too, you move then into triage, and then you move into the birthing suite.
And they're doing a lot of things to you, and there's a lot of asking you questions, which is invoking the analytical brain, and that's not where birth happens. I get a lot deeper into this stuff. I don't want to get too deep into that, but I get a lot deeper into this in my online courses. If you're interested in learning more about it, check it out. But moving on then to the birth center. The birth center
is a happy medium.
It's a great in the middle kind of place, right? Like if you're like, I don't know that I feel so comfortable with the home birth, but I also don't want to have or to face the potential of all the interventions that come in a
I think that
hospital.
The facing the interventions, I think that's a big piece of it. Or like not facing the interventions or not having those options there or facing them. But you still have to move. That big move from home to birth center.
Which, again, will keep you from really dropping deeply into labor land.
And when you first get there, too, chances are you have a doula. I mean, at our birth center, it's required, at least for your home birth or for your first birth, that you have a doula that knows when it would be time to go to the hospital, not the hospital, to go to the birth center. Doulas are pretty amazing at knowing intuitively, based off of how you're acting, where you are in dilation. The birth center also, the first thing that you do there is not going to be going into a triage room and getting a cervical check. It is going to be, let's check the heart rate of the baby. That was the first thing that we did. I declined cervical checks, and there was no question about that.
Right. There is not like a constant, like, okay, I'll come back and ask you this again in 2 hours. Okay, I'm going to come back and ask you this again.
No questions.
You don't have to do that.
There were no questions. And if there was a question, it was for me, it was in the middle of contractions when I came back, and it was more along the line of, do you want some fruit snacks?
Right.
That was my question.
So one thing to highlight here then, if you wanted an unmedicated birth, meaning you're going to try to labor and have your baby without an epidural, the hospital is not very familiar with that. They do not understand, most of them do not understand how to treat a woman who is doing unmedicated birth. Now, the birth center and the home births.
Listen to Meg's birth story.
Yes, right. She ends up having to, like, a bunch of people coming in because they'd never seen this before. They didn't know what was going on.
And one of my friends experienced that too.
It's very unusual. And so when you're talking about when they would come and ask me questions at the birth center, it would be in my breaks in between the contractions. The hospital staff, they don't really know to do that because they're used to people who have epidurals and they just talk to them whenever. You can't really... They can talk to you whenever if you're doing an unmedicated birth, but it doesn't help you. It actually causes a lot of problems, and they don't know that. And so the birth center and the home birth, they actually are a little bit more aware of how unmedicated birth works, and they try to get what they need to get done and navigate letting you be in labor land at the same time.
Yep. And one thing I want to mention too, at a hospital, we didn't mention this at all. Some hospitals do have the capability for you to labor in water in a tub. The hospitals here, at least, we only have one that does that, but they do not enable birth in a tub.
Yeah, they all have tubs, but they don't all have tubs in the room. In like your labor and delivery
room. That's one more
room.
move, okay, that you would have to make. Okay, good to know. At the birth center, every single birth suite has a tub
in your room,
and you're able to have a water birth.
So like once you get into that space, you can kind of like relax back down,
and that's your new space.
Right.
That's how I felt. Is I just relax into it.
What I will say is, anytime we are changing our location, birth is going to do a little bit of a change. It's going to do like a little bit of a hiccup, a slowdown. Something is going to change because the woman's animal primal body has to readjust and land back into that space. So both of the hospital and the birth center are requiring her to do that.
To make some moves.
In the home birth, though, that is not the case. The home birth, you are already in your safe, comfortable space maybe not, but ideally when labor starts. Typically labor starts at like 2 a.m. So hopefully you're already at home and you're comfortable when labor starts. And so that woman can drop into labor land really, really quickly and really, really deeply. And the one reason is because she doesn't have to go anywhere, and she knows it.
You know it too.
She knows it.
I was going to say you know it because I labored at home, but I still knew at some point I was going somewhere.
You're doing what you're doing and you're trying to relax, but you're always still like,
when do I get to go? And then you're waiting for the anticipation, because I even remember when I was told, like, hey, do you want to get in that shower or do you want to go to the birth center? I was like, oh, I'm ready to go. That means I'm 7 centimeters, because I know that that's what I had talked to her about. So it's bringing you back into like
analytical
the analytical
brain.
piece. Yeah.
Right. And
then in the car, I slowed down too. I think I had 2 or 3 surges.
And some people, so it'll always change when you change location. The car is a location, so it'll change in the car. It'll change when you get to the new space. And sometimes that can, like, getting back down into a good labor pattern can take, 30 minutes. But for some women, it can take like 4 hours to 6 hours. It just really, everybody's individual, and it depends on how long her subconscious mind and body starts to like settle down.
So let's talk about the home birth then.
The home birth, there's something super, super unique and sweet about home birth. There is a look on a woman's face when she goes into labor land. It's kind of like a glassy-eyed, not 100% here in this world look on her face. Most women don't get there until active labor. A home birth mama will literally get there an entire week before labor starts.
I think that's what enables them to you hear these stories of like, I was just baking, doing these things, and then you're like 2 hours later, baby's out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She gets her labor land glassiness. Some, maybe not a whole week. Sometimes it's 3 days. But a lot of midwives that practice home birth will know. I was a midwife assistant, so I would get the call from the midwife and say, she would say, "Hey, so and so is getting close." How does she know? Because she can see it in her eyes.
That's cool.
She can see that she's already dropping down in her body, her subconscious mind is already dropping down, getting ready for birth way before it even started.
That gives me goosebumps. That's
Isn't
so
it
cool.
beautiful? Yeah. And so when her actual labor starts, she drops in so deep and so fast. These labors unfold usually very quickly. So in the books, if you're reading a book about birth in active labor, the book will say that you're in active labor because your contractions are 1 minute long and they're about 5 minutes apart. That rarely happens for a first-time home birth mama. Hers is way different. Her contractions will be 1 minute apart, but they will be about 1 minute long for contractions, and they will be about 2.5 to 3 minutes apart. So things are like moving a lot faster. But you would think that might be overwhelming. Typically, they are so relaxed. They are so calm. They are so peaceful. They don't look anything like what you see on TV. It's just this beautiful, quiet glow, like this illumination that's happening in her body that she is able to flow with because she got to like drop down and get into labor land really quickly.
Because she felt safe in her space.
Yeah.
And with the people around her.
And they don't usually come out of it. Yeah. They stay there the whole time.
Unless
Unfortunately,
your kids wake up.
no, not really.
I'm completely kidding.
But the mamas who are doing birth center or hospital, they can achieve this at home if they're laboring at home, but they'll pop out when they make that move. And then they have to find it again.
I felt very in tune with what was going on throughout my entire... Actually, not at home. Not as much at home. But when I got to the birth center, I still felt in tune.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I was cracking jokes in between.
Yeah.
surges. I remember that.
I love it.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm excited to do the home birth
and get to try it in a different way.
Yeah. And then so timing then is quicker usually.
They usually unfold quicker. There's usually a lot less complications because typically in a home birth, those fight or flight hormones are not being drawn up by the woman. She's usually feeling really safe and confident. And so she's not battling, hormones like catecholamines in her body while she's trying to labor. A woman who's at a hospital usually is.
Yep. And I would like to say that when that feeling does come up, it's likely because she knows something is up and something is wrong. And a mother's intuition is very strong. So in a home birth setting, you can, and I've heard stories of this, of like, if there is something wrong, the mom usually is the one saying it. Like, I think something's up.
Yes.
I think that there is something that needs to be checked, or I think something's wrong.
Right.
And that's a great alert for midwives, but midwives are also there to be able to reassure.
Midwives are incredibly intuitive as well. So it definitely, a woman doesn't have to rely on her own devices to know that. The midwife she'll know really easily as well. Mm-hmm. And the reason she'll know, and this is something else we haven't really talked about yet, is she is in the space for hours as this labor unfolds, whereas an OB is typically in there for 15 minutes right before the baby is coming out, usually just the pushing phase. Yeah. Or you are attended by nurses primarily during labor, and they're only in there for 15 minutes every 2 hours. So they actually do not get to really watch how you're laboring and see your flow and see how you're doing.
So if something interrupts the flow in a home birth setting, even in a birth
she'll
center
notice
setting,
it right away.
Yeah.
Because she's been there. And that's usually when you said that the doulas can kind of just know, they can intuit when it's time to go. It's because they've been in there watching this unfold, and they know your labor, they know your labor pattern, and you can tell when something changes. And so just to take the burden, yes, you would feel it because you're in a more intuitive space, but you don't have to be the one. That was what I was trying to get at,
is that you're like in that. You're so deep into that intuitive space. And you can also, with home birth, you also can have a water birth in this setting as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So you can
great inflatable tubs.
Birth in a tub. You can labor in the tub for the entire time if you like.
And there is a way to keep the water warm.
Yes.
They've figured that out. So let's just wrap this all up. So we talked about the hospital birth, birth center birth, home births. We talked about some of the differences in the settings, as well as how birth unfolds. But how do you choose where you feel most safe? And I want to reiterate, or what the right setting is for you. I want to reiterate this. It's for you and your baby. It is for no one else. No one else's opinions. It's not where your friends have their births necessarily, or where they want you or tell you to have your birth.
And it's not avoiding judgment either.
Yes. Yep. It's not avoiding the judgment either. And it's also knowing that they can sit in their own discomfort.
Yes.
Yes. Where are you most comfortable in making this decision?
Can I just say, this is probably one of the most important, biggest thing you will do in your entire life. It's not this is not a place to make compromises. No, it's not a decision to be taken lightly. It's not a time to placate or pacify by just whatever they want because I didn't want to have conflict with them. This is the time to be selfish.
Yep. And this is a hard one that comes up because oftentimes you hear my partner doesn't want that. I just urge you to do the research and to share that with your partner, but to also share your feelings with them around it and where you feel most safe, because it can change the way your labor and birth goes.
100%.
And it can change then the way that your postpartum is.
And it can change how baby does after birth.
Yep, absolutely.
What I would say is, one, if you're high risk, you should be in a hospital.
Yeah. And you're going to be told that, from even the best, most crunchy home birth midwife will tell you that it's safest to be in a hospital.
But just like if you were interviewing for a new job, or you were buying a new house, or you're buying a new car, you want to go and check that thing out, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you want to have your physical body in that space and feel the environment. Yes.
Smell. How does that make you feel?
Right.
Take in breaths. Like, what does that feel like going into your lungs and exhaling it out? What are the emotions you get in your body? When I go into a hospital, when I even talk about, like, we were sitting here talking about it, I was starting to shake because I have some trauma from hospitals that, for me, I don't feel safe there.
Right.
But maybe that's where you feel most safe and most at home.
Right.
And maybe that's the right place for you. That's why we encourage you, like, go tour that hospital and tour various hospitals.
So the tours are typically free. And so I highly recommend, even if you just want a hospital and you have, like in Colorado Springs, we have 3 different hospitals that, not including the military ones, but 3 different civilian hospitals that you can choose from. Why not
tour them all?
Tour them all. Yeah. It really doesn't cost any money. It just takes a little bit of time.
Tour the birth center too.
Tour the birth center. Have an interview with a midwife for a home birth midwife. Those are also free. I feel like these things are free, and they give you the opportunity to check in with yourself, your emotions, your feelings, see how your body's reacting. Exactly.
Like, do you have something in the pit of your stomach, or do you just feel open and at home where you're like talking to someone?
So if you have an idea, like, I think maybe this feels right, but I'm not sure, I would say the very next step is do a tour, do an interview, and start to feel things out.
And same with home birth midwives. You can add them into the mix.
Absolutely.
To meet with them as well. So notice how your body and mind reacts.
And I think that your body is going to tell you. Like, you will find your knowing if you're unsure. You will find your knowing after you've done these tours and you've done these interviews. Mm-hmm. Do not, if you can, do not wait until 31 weeks. Don't bury your head in the sand about this decision. Do it as early as possible. If you have waited,
that is okay, but we're just recommending that if you have the opportunity to do it earlier, I mean, can't you even do it before you're pregnant?
Yeah, I think you can.
Yes, you can. You can tour them.
So just, as early as you can do it, the better, because you would feel a lot more comfortable making a change earlier than you do later. You kind of just get your kind of like growing roots, and maybe this doesn't feel like the best place, but you grew roots and that's where you're staying. And
then I also love the thing of, if you're touring all these places and you're taking gauge of these feelings that you have and how your body's reacting, what does that feel like to you at home? What are all those feelings at home when you walk in the door? Just a reminder there.
Well, and like I said, most of the home birth midwives will come to your house. Yep. So you kind of get to feel
them in your space.
Yes, exactly. And get a feel for how that's going to
And you can always ask them to come to your home if that's not something that they're offering.
Yes. Well, we hope that this was helpful. And if you are considering a change, maybe this brought up some thoughts and questions for you, reach out, comment, send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. If we didn't cover something that you still have questions about, throw it out there, because we'd love to add that as well. Thank you for joining us again. Until next time, stay happy and healthy.